You're listening to a Surge Radio podcast.
Sebastian Vettel, he has been leading almost from start to finish, but now is out of this race. And he and suddenly have crashed. They've gone into each other. Daniel Ricciardo late braking, couldn't stop in time. Max Verstappen was right in front of him. It's high fives for Lewis Hamilton, a five-time champion of the world.
Hello and welcome to Formula One in Review, a new podcast series with me, your host, Tom Claiborne. The F1 season has one race left, and with the season coming to a close, we thought it'd be best to look back at the season and just how it unfolded. To help me out are the expertise of Jake Willis and Tristan Fancourt, and today we'll be looking at the Grand Prix of Australia, Bahrain, China and Azerbaijan. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll start off with a very quite simple question. What were your thoughts on this season?
I love being called an expert.
No worries.
My thoughts on the season. So, I went from being an optimist at the beginning of the season to definitely being very pessimistic in regards to who could actually win the title. We're going to be talking about the first four races, so I'll get into that in a bit. However, I love this season. At the beginning, it was certainly one of the most interesting seasons I've tuned into for a very long time. We're at that point where Vettel won, Hamilton won, and even Ricciardo won. And you're starting to think, well, could we have a fourth car manufacturer or team on the winning podium? And that was, for me, the most exciting part. And then we just had some incredible points, from Red Bull taking each other out to, China with Ricciardo pushing through and winning. We had the great Vettel spinning in Germany, and of course Hamilton driving like an absolute ace throughout the season, and him finally winning his fifth world title, which is a very well done to him. And I think, this has been a great season for anyone who's just starting out in Formula One. Now is a really good time to come in. I think we're exiting that time of absolute domination from the Silver Arrows, the Mercedes cars, and we're entering in a stage where more teams could start winning.
Well, this is where I sort of agree as well. I think sort of the one thing that I've taken mainly from this season is that Lewis Hamilton is hands down now the driver of this generation, if not one of the best drivers of all time. He has proven that now with this fifth world title. I think he's made it quite clear that he is, as long as Mercedes are with him, going to try and challenge Schumacher's record of those 7 World Championship wins. But I think this season what we did see is we saw that dominance that Mercedes have had for the past 4 or so seasons. It evaporated almost. It evaporated. The Silver Arrows being that singular, team that were capable of dominating. That's gone. We've now seen how good Red Bull are. Red Bull are coming back into the swing of things, and Ferrari as well. And I'd argue this season even that Ferrari had the better car. They had the better car. It was faster in a straight line around corners, but they didn't have the best driver. If you put Hamilton into that car, I'm almost certain that he'd have walked the park. It would have been a far easier season than he had a Mercedes. But Vettel, as we saw with that spin at Hockenheim, as we saw throughout the season, just couldn't hack the pressure, couldn't do it. And I think moving forward, if Ferrari are going to challenge, if Red Bull as well are going to challenge, and they need to bed these drivers in. These drivers need to actually focus on the championship, much like Hamilton does, even if he is far flung away doing fashion and everything else that his ego produces. Very interesting points, and as you say, we'll be going on to those topics further on as we look onto the next 4 Grand Prix. So, starting off at the very beginning, it's a great place to start, of course, at the Australian Grand Prix. So, just to remind everyone of what happened, qualifying, Hamilton was first, Raikkonen was second, and Sebastian Vettel third. But the race finished very differently, with Vettel in first, Hamilton in second, and Kimi Raikkonen in third. The retirements, of course, from this race being the 2 Hasses of Grosjean and Magnussen, as well as Gasly, Ericsson, and Sirotkin. Starting off, if we look broadly at the qualifying times and what happened there, do you think this is a missed opportunity for Mercedes? Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, this was Mercedes' chance to make a statement for the rest of the season. And in qualifying, they did that. They did exactly that. You thought at the beginning, many people were saying that, oh, look, Hamilton's just going to dominate this season again. And from qualifying, that's what we saw. We saw Mercedes come out of the traps absolutely flying, frankly. But then we get, obviously the race and the result from that race, and we see Vettel, and then people are flipping it on its head. Twitter erupted saying that it is finally the season that Mercedes are challenged. And again, Vettel, the man that had won 4 titles previously for Red Bull, the man that many felt was the only person capable of challenging Lewis Hamilton, won the first race of the season, set that precedent. And it was on. It was the season that we wanted to see. We didn't want this Mercedes dominance. We wanted to see an actual fight happen. Was it a missed opportunity for Mercedes? Absolutely. Again, having that ability to set the precedent, to sort of put the foot down and say that we are still that dominant team. We are still that team that everybody can't even touch, let alone come close to. But as we saw later on in the season, it wouldn't matter. Hamilton, again, I personally think on the field he's mastered qualifying. If anything, I think it's now 70 or so pole positions that he has. I think that's a record as well that he holds in the most pole positions in Formula One. And the man is a genius when it comes to qualifying, but in this case, he just couldn't convert it. And that was a flaw of Mercedes here.
But you have to admit, Jake, that ultimately Mercedes were detrimented by circumstance because, of course, Romain Grosjean was stopped in the middle of the track. The virtual safety car came out, which resulted in Vettel being able to pit under the safety car, essentially getting a free pit stop compared to Hamilton. And you've ultimately got to admit that this really favoured Ferrari, who were out of this race until that very moment.
I mean, it brings into sort of the spotlight the idea of being able to pit under the safety car and if it should be allowed or not. Granted, yes, circumstances did benefit Ferrari and Vettel specifically in this case, but and perhaps there were circumstances that Mercedes could not have foreseen. But again, Mercedes failed to convert what was a dominant pole position by Hamilton into a race win. And when we look at a Formula One team and these strategists and planning for any and all scenarios, then they knew about this virtual safety car. It's a relatively new thing in the grand scheme of things. They knew that it could happen, perhaps because they were maybe a bit rusty because it was the first Grand Prix of the season. It wasn't expected. But again, Mercedes missed the buck and Ferrari massively benefited and had the opportunity to set the precedent for themselves.
Australia was a very interesting race because what I like to pick up on is Jake says that Hamilton is, this amazing driver, and he is certainly the best driver in the paddock at the moment. However, I think we do have to give other drivers credit because to say he's the best driver maybe puts him on this podium of being almost godlike in the car. If you think about back in the days of Ayrton Senna, when he would be driving along and his radio would come up and they say, look, slow down, you're going too fast, you're pushing the limits now. Hamilton doesn't drive like that. He's certainly always at the advantage because of his car manufacturer. That's luck more than anything else. Who knew that McLaren were going to be so dominant, and then who knew that Mercedes were going to be so dominant? Bear in mind, before the new rules came in, Mercedes was certainly in the middle of the pack. So Hamilton's had that to play, played very well to him, and the car plays to his strength very well as well, especially as it's so dominant. And this Australia definitely showed that Mercedes isn't a perfect team like we thought, and Hamilton isn't the perfect driver. In fact, both teams had to deal with the same situation. Both teams had to play the undercut if they could, and both teams had to react on the spot. And Mercedes weren't as quick as Ferrari. Ferrari pitted the car. They got to the undercut, if you'd like, and beat Mercedes. And Hamilton came up on the radio and said, how do we let this happen, guys? How do we let this happen? And he does have a point. They're both put in the same situation. and the Ferrari came out on top, and it's not the first time we've seen this happen. Mercedes this year has certainly demonstrated that their car can't necessarily switch on the tyres, the brakes can't perform as good as the Red Bull. China's a perfect example of that, and that Hamilton and Vettel are almost on an equal playing field when things are going right for both teams, because often you get in a situation where the Ferrari car has got something slightly wrong with it, i.e. it can't quite switch on the tyres, or perhaps Mercedes can't do that. So I would say that Hamilton is only super dominant. The days of being super dominant for Hamilton are sort of gone.
You see, the way you said something there that ultimately the Ferrari car is better. But does that not just make?
That.
Well, no. Okay, that was the inference that I took
why?
from.
Why was that the inference? What did I? Because I never said that. All I said was that both teams are almost equal, and they are almost equal. In fact, we've seen that the cars are very, very good. In fact, do you remember when there have been occasions where Ferrari have absolutely stormed past Mercedes, and occasions where Mercedes stormed past Ferrari? It just so happens that there are lots of things that got in the way of Vettel or Vettel's own mistakes as well. Don't forget the amount of mistakes he's made over the year.
Compared to Hamilton and definitely,
Hamilton's, and I think Vettel certainly is very blasé in the way he drives. Oh yeah, I can just get around this car. Oh, I'm just going to try and get through Verstappen, and that's the sort of things that will let him down. But the cars themselves, I think the days of an absolute dominant Mercedes are gone, and now we're getting to an equal playing field.
You both make some very good points there. Of course, Toto Wolff said after the race that a Mercedes computer system had calculated wrongly the time gap, and that Hamilton needed to ensure that he had enough advantage to keep the lead under a safety car. The only thing he could have done ultimately was to get the hammer down, so to speak. But that would have been detrimental for him in the long term, as it would have hindered the quality of his tyres later on. So, do you think, from what you both said, that ultimately Hamilton's season could have been even easier if the paddock and ultimately the Mercedes in the garage hadn't have made so many mistakes?
I mean, I think it couldn't necessarily be that much easier, just because the amount of mistakes that happened thanks to everyone else. Hamilton is a very consistent driver. He does actually struggle a little. I've noticed he does struggle a bit when things don't start going his way. We do hear him a lot going on the radio saying, "Oh, I'm feeling a little bit of understeer here," and that's when you see those mistakes coming out, where you can see the focus is slipping a little bit. However, Hamilton had a very, very as easy a season as he probably needed this year. It probably could have been easier if Mercedes were absolutely on point, but there aren't many times this year where I've thought, "Oh, Mercedes, you've massively messed this one up." Australia's sort of the small example of that.
In terms of, we're going back to the mistakes in this case, and I think this was a mistake by the Mercedes team in Australia specifically, and not one of Hamilton personally. But I think we go back to the idea of throughout the season, Vettel definitely made more mistakes than Hamilton made, and that was what cost Ferrari in general their season. I thought, in terms of actually, preparing the car tactically, even their strategists were more on point than Mercedes are, I would argue. It was actually the mistakes by Vettel during the drive during the race, that caused Ferrari to lose ground on an ever consistent Hamilton. And when it does come to consistency, I agree, Hamilton is on point with that. And I do agree as well, Tristan. When the things go sort of, things are on the down for Mercedes, and Hamilton does react quite negatively to that. But on the same premise that when things are down for Ferrari, Vettel reacts in a worse manner.
Yeah, he's almost desperate sometimes.
He gets desperate, and that's where you could have Hamilton being negative, but when Ferrari are on the down, Vettel almost loses the plot, and that's where again it's these little things that separate those two drivers. In the case of Australia, we see the teams performing to a certain level, which allowed Ferrari to beat Mercedes, because Mercedes had an off weekend. In the case of the drivers, no, I think when you look at consistency and you look at Hamilton, there's no question that he is the more consistent driver between the two of them.
I'd also like to. So Australia was not just for me focused on Hamilton and Vettel, because obviously Vettel won, Hamilton came second. I was like, this is amazing. Then suddenly you've got Raikkonen a third, so another Ferrari. We had a 1-3 Ferrari. Ricciardo had a Red Bull fourth, and suddenly McLaren fifth. And that was. That was when I say optimistic.
Really
yeah, when I say optimistic, I love the fact that Vettel won. I like the fact that there was a battle between those two. The fact that we have two Ferraris, Mercedes, Red Bull, and McLaren all fighting it out there at the top.
The fact that Alonso made fifth in that first race, what got me so excited.
I can't think of any other time this season where McLaren did well as well as that.
But it was one of those things where I was like, finally, McLaren have finally got over this. But they've just got Renault engines. They've just signed this massive deal with Renault after getting rid of Honda, and that those 2 seasons that were plagued by complete and utter error. And Alonso finished fifth in the first race of 2018, and it was insane. But then again, yes.
But bear in mind, McLaren have got an amazing driver. There is no...
He's now going, isn't he? Yeah.
Well, they've got him for one more race, and that's why I thought this would be an amazing year, because McLaren had Alonso and they were up there, and that was brilliant. And we had the 2 Ferraris and the Red Bulls as well. And I think that's the other thing as well this year. It's well and good saying that Mercedes and Ferrari have done brilliantly. Let's not forget Red Bull, because Red Bull really switched on where it mattered. But I think Red Bull have had this year the same problem as Ferrari do with Vettel. You've got these drivers who are incredibly talented, and there's no doubt in my mind that Ricciardo is certainly has the ability to win the World Championship, and Verstappen probably will at some point. There will be a team that will take him up. And so we're looking at 2 drivers there who are fantastic, but they are both a little bit rogue sometimes. I mean, the iconic moment was in the Azerbaijan race when when Ricciardo slammed at the back of him, just because Ricciardo decided to do what Ricciardo always does, which is late braking, and Verstappen did what Verstappen always does, which is defend to the very end. And so you've got 2 teams that 2 drivers there that had the ability to go rogue. And at the first half, I made a bet that Verstappen wouldn't make it to the end of the year without being either dropped down to the Toro Rosso team or some serious sanctions coming through, just because Verstappen in the first half of the year was ridiculous. He was manic often, and Ricciardo is a very cool guy. I mean, he's one of my favourite drivers at the moment, but he needs to stop playing chicken a bit with other drivers, that last dart around the end, because the problem with outbraking someone is outbraking relies on the other car having worse brakes than yours, and you not having already overheated your brakes, which is why you do it on the long straights. So this was such a great race, because to me it really opened my eyes at new teams that might be able to win.
Yeah, well, you've mentioned a couple of points I was hoping to get onto at the last stage of this podcast, but no worries. You've talked about Alonso, of course, finishing 5th. However, there was a big reason for that, wasn't there? Of course, the safety car, which meant he was originally in 10th, but of course, with Romain Grosjean, as I said, crashing out and provoking a virtual safety car, resulted in him being in 5th. Now, we've touched upon the idea of a safety car and pitting under it. What are your opinions on this? Because some, of course, will argue that it's tactical genius and the fact that, it provides luck for some drivers who, on merit alone, wouldn't be able to reach the heights of the podium or even the top 10. And then ultimately it's a practical in the fact that they get a free pit stop. Others would argue, of course, that this is not based on merit at all and effectively is borderline cheating. So what would your thoughts be on that?
There are 2 schools of thought almost, aren't there? Because for the smaller teams, it's a godsend, because it allows them to catch up with the pack. It allows them to almost compete. At certain points, they might even be, a lap down, and they can actively, get back into the race, and challenge for, one of those top 10 places. And then the other school of thought is almost, well, why do they deserve that? If they can't achieve that through pure racing skill, then why should they be competing? Why should they be anywhere near the the top? I remember, who was it? I think it was Fisichella. Ages ago, I can't remember who was driving for it. Can you remember who was driving? Was it Toyota?
Force India, I believe.
was it he came from like 20th or something and won the race, and then Ferrari snapped him up. This was a long time ago. This was like 2010 or something.
I think
Ridiculous like
before
that.
maybe 2009, I think.
Maybe even 2009. And that was all started off by, not in this case not a virtual safety car, but a safety car. And he was able to, smash it out and get to the front of the grid. And that was fantastic. Those sorts of races are so good to watch. But the argument is that why should that have happened? Should he have been really anywhere near the front if, conditions did not meet his needs? So yeah, in my personal opinion, over the from the whole Red Bull dominance and the Mercedes dominance, I've sort of got bored with the same old. That's why again Australia was such a fantastic Grand Prix, because we saw so many teams getting involved. But for me, I think why not allow teams to pit, allow drivers to pit during safety cars and virtual safety cars, because it spices the race up. And for the most part, that's why the fans watch it. They want to see exciting races. Obviously, the big teams are going to complain, and they have the most power, so I wouldn't be surprised if they, ban this in the future. But again, for the fans, it's a great thing.
So my thoughts on it is that it's not cheating because all teams have equal opportunity. And when Formula One has been reduced down quite a lot by rules, and there are very strict innovation rules, we have to add in a little bit of spice somewhere, because if a safety car came about and no team could take advantage of it, then you might as well bring the cars back into the pit lane, put them back in the garages, wait a few minutes till they've cleared out all their stuff, bring them back out, and then send them back out in the same order with the same time limits, right? That's the thing. The safety car is there for a purpose, and it'll bunch the cars up, and that's really good. You got basically another restart. It gives opportunity. It brings in new opportunity, and there's no strategy like there used to be. You can't refuel cars anymore. Tire rules are much more strict. Even aerodynamic rules are coming in now that will for the next set in 2021 and stuff. That is going to limit people's innovation abilities further. So why restrict it even more? Because it just gives new opportunity. And as I say, no car is under different rules than the other. Now, what I do think is cheating is, do you remember back in the season where Vettel said that people are driving ridiculous lines in order to cheat the virtual safety car?
Oh yes, yep.
Now, the way the virtual safety car works is that every 50 meters around the track, the car is measured against basically this safety car that's going around. So this time, they add 30% to what they say is the fast time around the track. And that's the time you've got to do it in. Imagine like you're in a video game when you're following that ghost car. Basically that. And so every 50 meters, you've got to be slower than this time. Now, what Vettel was getting onto there is because the way the FIA record 50 meters, it's not 50 meters along the track. It's 50 meters that the car drives. So if you can imagine, if you can drive this corner in less meters, it means you can get further up the track. But if you drive it in the same amount of time, it doesn't matter. So you can cut the distance, and then in 50 meters, so you've done 50 meters, but you've done it in the same amount of time, but you've just shortened the track by driving a ridiculous line. It's not the racing line. So you can basically get slightly further. That's cheating. That is cheating the rules, and they're going to change that, and they're going to adjust that. But the actual safety car isn't cheating, because it just, as I say, it just adds a little bit of spice. And sometimes Formula One can be so boring when you're watching cars go around. We've got Azerbaijan coming up, and we've got constant radius corners. Oh, not Azerbaijan, sorry, Abu Dhabi, and we've got constant radius corners, and we're gonna have. It might be a little bit boring, but you throw a bit of safety car in there, suddenly Alonso or even Van Dorn or Bottas or someone, Hulkenberg, takes advantage of it. There's the undercut by a team you don't think, and suddenly Force India are on third. Or, Williams will be counting on this sort of stuff to get up into those points, because Williams got a slower car this year than they did last year. Yeah, it's ridiculous how they've done that. So why not allow a little bit of spice? Why not allow these little things to be thrown up? Because then you can see what drivers can actually do. When you see, Verstappen taking advantage of an out-of-place Mercedes that can't follow it, you suddenly think, do you know what? He's actually good. This is why Leclerc is going up to Ferrari, because he can just add in a little bit of magic when it needs to be done. So the safety car allows that. It's a vessel for opportunity.
For sure, and I mean, ultimately, when 1 week Ferrari will benefit from the safety car, and next week Mercedes will. It's all down to luck, so it's not systematically.
It's an equal playing field. And
Exactly.
There are more times when the safety car doesn't really affect the race, that especially 1 and 2. Than it does affect 1 and 2. But later on down the road, sometimes, the fight between 5th, 6th and 7th is way more entertaining.
For sure, and I mean, looking at excellent racing, look no further than the next race we're looking at, that being Bahrain, of course. So in qualifying, it was with Vettel in first, Raikkonen in second, Bottas in third, and then that radically switched up again with Vettel in first, Bottas in second, and Lewis Hamilton storming from 9th place to 3rd place, with the DNFs being, of course, Kimi Raikkonen, Ricciardo, and Verstappen. So going on to the first point, we saw Lewis Hamilton recover to 3rd place after starting in 9th, including one sensational move where he effectively passed 3 cars consisting of Ocon and Hulkenberg in one move early in the race. Does the fact that Hamilton is able to make such a remarkable comeback, not only up the field in numbers, but also make such a spectacular move, which we've not seen in Formula 1 history, at that corner at Bahrain, does this for you make it clear that he is one of the world's greatest drivers and he ultimately deserves all the plaudits he can get? Because there are those in the F1 community which say that ultimately it's the car that's the reason why he's won so many championships, and put him in a lesser car, put him in a Red Bull, and he would be nowhere near the amount of records on races or championships he's currently at. What are your thoughts on this?
See, I would argue that if you put him in a Red Bull, he'd be there anyway, because I think that his driving ability, as we've seen, is a massive factor into why he's so good. We've seen this year the fact that the cars, the gap between the cars has moved. Red Bull and Ferrari have significantly caught up, and if not overtaken, in my opinion, in the case of Ferrari, Mercedes, and therefore, I personally think if you put him in a car of what I consider similar quality, then of course he's going to be able to do exactly what he did in Bahrain. It's just skill. Of course, the car comes into it at some point. If you were to, for example, put him in a Haas, then he's not going to be finishing. He's not going to be getting poles every single race weekend, and he's not going to be winning races every single weekend. But he might finish, up there. And I think, for all it's worth, yes, your car is fantastic, 50% of it all, but the driver is the other 50%. The driver makes, I'd argue, I look back at the Red Bulls, 4 years of utter dominance, and I look back and I go, I personally think Webber was the better driver. I think Mark Webber was the better driver than Sebastian Vettel. But Red Bull wanted Vettel to win. Red Bull actively, we saw with team orders and everything, pushed Vettel in the right direction and held Mark Webber back. And then you see Mark Webber going over to different FIA sanctioned races, for example, Le Mans, and dominating that. Webber was a fantastic driver, but Vettel was given, the plaudits and, all of this, that and the other. But they had the best car, hands down. Nobody came close to that Red Bull. They had Adrian Newey designing the aerodynamics in a time where aerodynamics were allowed to be, touched and meddled with and all of that before they brought in all of that regulation. And now we're seeing Vettel in a Ferrari, arguably one of the best cars on the grid. But not a complete dominating vehicle, and he can't do it. He can't, it's not there. So that just shows to me that Lewis Hamilton, regardless of what the scenario was, regardless of whether it was Bahrain, Australia, Abu Dhabi, whatever, he is the best driver on that grid, and give him one of the equal cars, again, in my opinion, of a Ferrari or a Red Bull, and he'd have won this championship as well.
Bahrain, what a race that was, with a with Verstappen and Ricciardo. It wasn't Azerbaijan. I think I said Azerbaijan earlier. It wasn't. With those two crashing into each other like blundering buffoons. You had Vettel in first, Bottas in second, Gasly was my hero for that one. It's a Toro Rosso coming in fourth, and I know Hamilton came third, but I don't really care about that. Hamilton can come third anytime he wants. Gasly in the Toro Rosso, powered by Honda. This is what I was on about this season. By race 2, suddenly we had a completely different podium. We had Vettel, we had suddenly 2 Mercedes and a Ferrari instead of 2 Ferraris and a Mercedes. And you got fourth being Toro Rosso, and then Haas at fifth. You know, when you were saying that Hamilton could be, can't do his magic in a Haas. Well, you know who did do it? Magnussen. Magnussen did the magic in the Haas. Gasly pushing that Honda engine, and fine, things went their way. And it was a street circuit, so maybe power units aren't everything. But these are the races when you've got to navigate the streets, you've got to navigate those shorter flats. These are the circuits where you see what drivers are made of. And as I said earlier, you saw the terrible moves from Ricciardo and Verstappen that led to that anger from Christian Horner. He looked so angry. I wouldn't like to be in their shoes. And it was just a brilliant race. I couldn't want for a better race. And actually, if the rest of the season had occurred like that, i.e., completely different podium drivers on the podium, I think we'd have one of the most secure futures for Formula One. Now, as it turned out, Mercedes did dominate, but by this point, this was hooked me this season already.
Sure. Now we've looked at the Mercedes side of the coin, and let's look at Ferrari and Sebastian Vettel. So we remember he said over the radio, the tyres are done, and this was of course in the last 10 laps, and Bottas closed up 5 seconds in 5 laps and was right on Vettel's tail as they entered the final lap. But a half-hearted move in the first corner was not enough, and Vettel was able to hang on and of course win the race. Now, what are your thoughts on Sebastian Vettel and his consistent ability, although he has made mistakes, this is very true and we've talked about this, but his ability to effectively manage tyres? Do you think that earns him some plaudits and earns him the respect in the paddock as being, okay, not as good as Hamilton, but a great driver?
Well, so what happened this year had almost, it was opposite of what happened in Sochi last year in Russia. If you remember, Bottas was in first and was struggling, and Vettel caught up behind him, and it was such a tight ending there with Vettel only just coming in second. So, I mean, these things will balance out in the end. But Vettel is certainly good at managing tyres. The thing about tyre management, though, is it's so varied between race to race. I mean, it annoys me so much that Pirelli has all these different tire compounds. You have the ultra soft, super soft, soft, medium, hard, and what do we don't see the hard. Did anyone see that light blue wool tyre this year? No, of course they didn't. No one saw them at all. In fact, there might even be one lower than ultra soft, like mega soft. I don't know. that'll be next. Mega soft. But I don't understand why Pirelli doesn't bring 3 compounds to the track and just call them soft, medium, and hard. It'd make life so much easier, because you have to remember, on a minute, super soft is softer than soft, but harder than ultra soft, and I just don't care. And the tyres are so tricky, because in some tracks Mercedes are really hard on them, some tracks Ferrari are, some tracks Red Bull are, and it's usually down to the amount of downforce they produce and the type of track it's on. Now, Vettel is a good tyre management, but I think tyre management as a whole detracts a bit from its racing. If you're having to it's like lifting and coasting. It's one of those things. If you limit drivers' ability to really race, really go for it, then what you start doing is having boring races. And so that's the thing. I think Vettel is a very good racer, and he is very good at managing his tyres. I think Hamilton is as well, though. Right. In fact, I don't think I can look at any of them and go, oh, he's rubbish at managing his tyres. But, I can't think of there's no driver this year that had a purposeful 4-stop race. And usually if they have a 3-stop race, because something's gone dramatically wrong.
I think this is your argument there, Tristan, is a pretty sound one, but you made the point of going through the tyre compounds. I think it's time for us to have a choice of tyres now. I remember
yeah,
back in the day where it was
Yeah.
Michelin and Bridgestone, and then it went. I think it was straight to Bridgestone, and now it's Pirelli and all of that. We need a sort of competitive market for tyres again, because honestly, anything like that makes Formula One better. One of, well, in my opinion, the best motorsport in the world. When you have that, competition within the competition, which is why I look at different, again, FIA sanctioned motorsports, and I look at sort of things like LMP1 in Le Mans, and they're allowed to do so many technical things with their vehicles, aerodynamic wise, tire wise, even going basically through everything, bodywork, etc. And it makes it exciting. Back in the day when F1 had didn't have all of these regulations, and I can understand why a lot of them have come in, the Halo and things like that, from previous events exactly. But we need the sport to again be competitive internally, so then it becomes more competitive externally when the drivers are on the track. And when was the last time somebody had a blowout? Seriously, like realistically, when I remember when Pirelli first joined, and it was like every other race that somebody's tyres exploded, and that was quite fun to watch. However dangerous it might have been, but you knew some like drama was going to happen. Now you're just sort of sat there going, well, nothing's happening. So bring back some, tyre competition. As for Vettel and the rest of the grid, and I agree with Tristan, they're all good at managing their tyres. They have to be good at managing their tyres. If they weren't good at managing their tyres, they wouldn't be on the track.
Oh, can I pick up a point? I completely agree that with you saying that we need to have more development with the idea of options. I think this is dangerous because having manual research and development, i.e. each individual teams going off and separately developing something, is problematic because Mercedes has so much more money than, let's say, I don't know,
Sauber or someone.
Sauber. They have
Yeah.
so much more money than them, so they can invest in it. But what I'm in favour of is this idea of like Lego. Imagine Lego F1. You can choose every drivetrain is fitted identically, i.e. you can pop it into your car, and they're actually changing this. They're changing some of the rules with if you basically can just pop a Mercedes engine into your car and just pop a Ferrari engine into your car. Standardized parts, basically, but have competitive standardized parts. I say, right, you can have your clutch, you can develop your clutch yourself, but when it comes to the power unit, obviously you can have a Mercedes, a Ferrari, a Red Bull. When it comes to tires, you can have a Bridgestone, a Michelin, or you can have Pirelli, and all that sort of stuff. The development should be done a lot on things like the chassis. I like that. I like the fact that different teams can develop their own engines as long as there's equal opportunity to get them. So I know that won't ever happen, but that would be nice if car manufacturers could go, I want that thing, and sort of just match their own car up, just to add in, I want these tyres. And some races, the Bridgestone tyres be amazing, but Pirelli be rubbish, and sometimes vice versa. Just spice things up a little bit.
I'd go one step further and say we need more works teams within Formula One. I remember back in the day when we had Jaguar, there were talks of Aston Martin coming along at one point. Works teams bring with them the money to be able to compete. And when you have, teams separate to that, rather non-works teams, they just cannot compete. They don't have that, that money to be able to fund what you've just discussed effectively, Tristan.
Red Bull and Aston Martin are together.
Yes, they are. Yeah,
so
correct.
we do have
some
of the card
we do. I mean, Red Bull's a very interesting case. It's almost the anomaly in that regard.
It's a bit of an odd team.
Yeah. But when we're looking at things like Haas, or a Sauber, and yes, Sauber have been around and have been in the racing world for a very long time. But again, they don't have the finances to be able to compete with a Mercedes or a Ferrari. These car manufacturers that have existed and have been in the sport for ages. Same with McLaren.
Yeah.
they just do not have the clout to be able to, compete. So I think we just in general need more works teams. I would absolutely love to see Red Bull be like a fully Aston Martin team. That would be amazing.
That'd be nice.
Or like a Toyota back in the day when Toyota were around, or Honda when Honda had a team as well.
Back in the when Nicky Kovalainen was
exactly.
Toyota. That was a great season.
And Jarno Trulli and drivers like that. Oh, fantastic times. But genuinely, when it comes to competition, I think the sport would hugely benefit from having an influx of properly funded works teams.
And I think this develops into one of the things that I really thought about when it comes to Formula One, because entrance into Formula One is difficult for teams, but it's getting harder and harder for fans.
Yeah.
As in, as a student, I can't afford Sky. I cannot afford that amount of money per month. I don't even know how much it costs you, hundreds of pounds, because you have to get Sky Sports or the day passes. And F1 TV is, if you want to have the live races, it's $99 a year, but you can't have it in the UK because of these licensing rights. And when you say openness needs to really come back to Formula One, I completely agree with you there. There needs to be, and I think Liberty Media are actually taking this on board, there needs to be a way of fans watching it. If you start cutting off your fan supply, what you end up doing is reducing the numbers of watching it. If you reduce the numbers of you watching it, then what's the point of it all, really? It is supposed to be entertainment. Formula One was started by a group of blokes deciding to take a few cars, painting them in different colours, and then racing them around a circuit.
It's not untrue, is it?
And people come and watch it. Oh, it's brilliant. No, then it was on radio, then it was on TV, and now, luckily, Channel 4 have got it next year, but only the highlights, apart from the British Grand Prix.
That's true, yep.
Well, which is really disappointing. Commercialism has taken over Formula One
like any
so
sport,
much, and I don't mind that. I don't mind the fact that there is adverts. I don't care there's adverts, as long as I can watch the race. I don't care that they have 30 minutes of adverts before. As long as the race, I can watch the race. Or I'm even satisfied with the highlights, grumpily. And this is the thing about Formula One. It's not as open as it used to be. I remember sitting down watching BBC, because BBC was just on BBC, brilliant.
Yep.
And then Sky sort of started wiggling their way in, and I don't mind that. I don't mind it's from Sky as well, and I don't mind that we have alternate live races and highlights. In fact, I think that's the perfect middle point. For those who can't afford to pay for the Sky, you get half of them, and so I think the best ones as well. And for the people that can afford it, you get the premium. You get these fantastic things, but they're cutting it off. They're cutting the fans off, and they're cutting the ability for teams to get in there. And Formula One needs to take it. And this was actually, I think, Bernie Ecclestone's fault. And I'm not a fan of Ecclestone. His deals he did with Sky were detrimental for the fan. I think the deals he did with teams were detrimental for the teams. And I think team spirit really came about this year, especially when Force India wanted to re-enter into the Formula One. Because the way it usually works is when someone buys a team, you buy with it the FIA agreement that you're allowed to race. Mm-hmm. But because they were going into administration, what actually happened was the people that bought Force India, who's the dad of one of the racers.
Lance Stroll's dad.
Lance Stroll,
Yeah.
that's it. When Stroll bought it.
I think Lawrence is his name. Lawrence
Yeah,
Stroll,
Lawrence Stroll. He bought basically everything they had, effectively, apart from the actual final agreement, because they couldn't quite negotiate that, and the FIA wanted to get in. And when they got back in, that's why they're still called Force India, because you have to have the chassis name in your team, and it's a Force India chassis. So when they got back in, the question was, what do they do with the prize money? Because obviously the drivers who keep their points, because you're allowed to change teams, had all these points, and the team actually said, you know what, you're allowed to keep your prize money. And I think that shows the difference between the commercial side of Formula One and the sportsman side of Formula One. Formula One is actually quite, I was going to say generous, but it's very open within itself, and they are a nice bunch of blokes, and they're nice people. The men and women involved in it are nice, and they're cutting off the fans from it, and that's just going to be dangerous and detrimental to the sport.
I completely agree. It's not only with coverage, but also if you were to go to, say, the British Grand Prix, I've looked at prices, and it's hundreds of pounds, and that's only for practice and qualifying.
So I was privileged enough to go to Hockenheim 2 years ago when it was on, and the only reason we went there was because they were desperate to get fans there,
Yep.
and they cut the prices so much. I think it was only about 40 euro for each, and there was 4 of us there for the entire weekend, and it was a fantastic weekend. It was a boring race, but a brilliant weekend.
I mean, I've been incredibly privileged to go to Silverstone 5 times, but I've never paid once. The company my father works for, he, haulage company. They knew people. In fact, the irony of it all is that my dad quite well knows David Coulthard's brother, and they're quite good friends. So therefore, we've been in the paddock and we've done things like that before. But it's over £300 without a grandstand seat.
Yep.
To go to the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, just for the 3 days. So that's practice, qualifying, and the race. And again, when you talk about consumerism and Silverstone, there's 90,000 people go to Silverstone. They reckon 150,000 over the course of the 3 days. Which is fantastic, but they still aren't making a profit on the thing. So you can understand why Liberty Media are going in the direction they are going.
That's
in.
Eccleston's fault, because they're not making a profit on it, because the rules they negotiated for some reason said that every year the price goes up by this ridiculous margin, and I don't know the ins and outs of it. It's on the internet if you want to Google it quickly. And there's no wonder why Silverstone might not have a race in the coming years.
I mean, it will.
Well, it might not. I don't know what happened to Brands Hatch, and that's the thing. I think for the fans, it's detrimental that you're limiting it. And I pray that Liberty Media will take this on board and just do something about it. Please, just undo the damage that's been done by this horrible deal with Sky, for example.
Amen to that. So going on to the Chinese Grand Prix, qualifying with Sebastian Vettel in first, Raikkonen in second, and Bottas in third. This once again flipped on its head with Daniel Ricciardo of Red Bull taking the victory with this one, with Bottas in second and Kimi Raikkonen in third. The DNS, now get ready for this, was Magnussen, Ocon, Alonso, Van Dorn, Hartley, Sorokin, Gasly, Stroll, Leclerc, and Ericsson. So I think there's quite a few people there have gone out, arguably more than even started the race, but there we go. So the safety car threw a curveball, and Red Bull, as they normally do, grabbed their chance. It was introduced so they could clear the debris of the hairpin between a collision of the Toro Rosso's Pierre Gasly and Brendan Hartley. Of course, Ricciardo didn't even make qualifying on Saturday following an engine failure. After the race, he thanked the mechanics for building the car in time, and Bottas was leading from Vettel, Verstappen, Hamilton, and then Ricciardo, who came back through the pack, and the second of Kimi Raikkonen, who had been sacrificed to help Vettel fight Bottas. But of course, this was all in vain. Mercedes and Ferrari chose to leave their cars on medium compound tyres, and that were 10 laps old, and that Red Bull switched it up and decided to go for softer tyres, and this gave them a decisive pace advantage. Verstappen was at one stage the favourite and tried to move on the outside of Hamilton, but was far too aggressive as per usual and ran off the track, and Ricciardo was able to get past. This resulted, of course, in him who'd already passed Raikkonen, then picked off Hamilton, Vettel and Bottas and clinched a stunning win. The moves, of course, being trademark Ricciardo from a hugely committed dive bomb from the inside from a long way back, but of course being in total control. Now, the big question I think here is, seeing how well Ricciardo did in this race, do you think if he was in a more reliable Red Bull, because of course Red Bull has had some huge reliability issues with the Renault engine, of course it being Ricciardo had to bear the brunt of this season, but not too long ago it was of course Verstappen. Do you think though that if he were in a Mercedes or a Ferrari he would be fighting for the championship, or do you think ultimately that because all of his victories are spectacular and heroic and sort of at the last moment, that fans see him in a sort of rose-tinted view? What are your thoughts on this?
He's certainly a talented driver. There's no doubt about that. And often his heroic nature of his wins are simply just because of the situation he's been placed into. One of those, sort of do or die, now or never. Let's dive in. You got the brakes to support it. And actually, when Ricciardo gets into the lead, you can see that he just bugs off, like all other drivers do. Verstappen's the same. As soon as they get into the lead, that's it. They just off they go. And so, if they were in the same situation with, as like Hamilton is obviously often when he dives into the lead and that's it, off he goes. I think he is certainly he'd be one of those drivers. Looking back at Hamilton's career, especially before he won the World Championships, and sort of being that young driver, you could see that he was a bit like that as well. He did these amazing moves. And as a driver matures and gets into the position where they don't need to do that, they do it less. And so people forget that they used to do that. And he is certainly, as I said earlier, a world championship winning caliber of driver. He's a fantastic driver, and so is Max Verstappen. And matched with China, which is, if you're going to go back and watch another Formula One race, I'd highly recommend the China one this year, because that Chinese Grand Prix is brilliant. That track is fantastic. You want to see how to do corners? You take a look at that opening long sweeping corner of China. The Chinese Grand Prix, where it starts off with that sort of tight curve going tighter and tighter and tighter, and then spinning around you and go the other way. And so that shows you how much of a talented driver Ricciardo is, by being able to control your car through that sort of drive, especially as there is a racing line, but there isn't one way to drive it. And being able to control it so well and make those dives so well as he did, he is certainly a fantastic driver. And I think given the opportunity in a car that can basically do half the job for him, as the Red Bull I don't think does half the job for him, he would certainly be able to win the championship. And if give him the same opportunity as Hamilton, I reckon he'd give Hamilton a run for his money, if not beat him.
This is it, yeah. Ricciardo is, in my opinion, a fantastic driver. He's one of almost the dark horses on the grid. We know his ability, but he has never had a car that has shown that ability off. And I think that's very much credit to him, because he's been able to win races like in China, where it was a fantastic drive, that race. But when it comes to it, yeah, I think if he was in one of the big teams, I think at Ferrari he'd absolutely flourish, because I feel like he's quite a consistent driver. His driving style would suit that Ferrari, in my opinion. The way he likes to break at the last minute, bomb around. I personally think he would be challenging. That's why I'm so interested to see what he'll do when he moves to Renault next season, because I feel like this Renault engine, there's something about this Renault engine, obviously, that we developed going into the next season, that I feel could potentially, be title challenging. But it's again there to see. If Ricciardo's up there, put it that way, it will be a fantastic season.
I agree.
Because again, like I say, he is a fantastic driver, and it will blow the pack open, because obviously we've got Mercedes, we've got Hamilton there with Mercedes, we've got Vettel with Ferrari, who have to improve next season. Otherwise, I can't see them not improving. They have to, after what happened this season. We've got Red Bull, who, again, are there or thereabouts, and hopefully, I'm praying it happens, we also have Renault, and Daniel Ricciardo is challenging, because he is a fantastic driver and he deserves to be up there. He deserves a good car as well.
Thank you very much for that. Very good opinions. And once again, I think as well, if Renault were to take the fight in this championship and consistently get on the pole position, or even, to qualify or to have a result on the podium, that would definitely be good for the sport. So moving on to our final race review of this podcast. Of course, this was Azerbaijan. So in qualifying, it was Sebastian Vettel on pole, Hamilton on second, and then Bottas in third. But going on to the race, of course, is radically shifted, with Perez in third, Raikkonen in second, and Hamilton in third, with the retirements being a very long list again. Get ready for this one. Bottas, Grosjean, Verstappen, Ricciardo, Hülkenberg, Ocon, and Sirotkin. So, cast your minds back to that very race. Another safety car was triggered by a crash between the two Red Bulls of being...
it was Azerbaijan. I was right.
It was,
myself.
Yes, no, you were absolutely right. So, many say at this point, if you cast your minds back, this being on the main straight, of course, this being Verstappen ahead of Ricciardo, and many are divided on this. Some are saying that ultimately Verstappen moved, as he normally does, far too late and almost illegally, in the fact that he doesn't commit to where he is on the track and will essentially move from side to side, and therefore is going to promote a crash, we touched on before. But then there's others who say that Ricciardo was far too aggressive, braked far too late, and ultimately he was at fault as well. Christian Horner, of course, was furious, and there was many harsh words flung between the two behind closed doors. The last time, of course, the Red Bulls have been known to have a crash like this was back in 2010 in the Turkey Grand Prix. And, of course, Red Bull have been known for employing two drivers for fighting fiercely on the track and are not in favour of team orders. So going on from this, though...
Like the past.
Of course. But going on from this, do you think... that the smaller teams, I'm not saying Red Bull's a small team, but do you think that ultimately when a team like Red Bull or Renault or Haas or Force India are in a position of either the top 3 or top 5, they should employ team orders, or are you wholly against the idea of team orders in Formula 1?
I'm wholly against the idea of team orders in Formula 1. I can understand it from a tactical standpoint, but... It just takes the excitement away. It's all about, like, for me, and I understand that it's a competition, and I understand that teams want, perhaps want their predominant driver to win, but I just don't understand it from a fan perspective. Where, if, let's say, Verstappen and Ricardo, sorry. I was going to say Raikkonen. Verstappen and Ricardo are, at the front of the grid. They're fighting it out. They deserve to fight it out between each other. That's what makes Formula 1 so good. That competition. You're never going to win if you aren't willing to fight for it. In this case, in Azerbaijan, yes, they happened to go into the back of each other. And yes, for the team, that was utterly catastrophic. But ultimately, how many times does this happen? How many times does that I mean, you say in the case of Red Bull, it hasn't happened since 2010. That was a whole 8 years ago, and we've had countless races. Almost maybe even almost 200 races since then. Like, just let them fight it out. The fans deserve that. The drivers deserve that. To be able to try and pit one other. And I know obviously Horner and how furious he was in that meeting about how he hated the fact and very much so. Understandably that the race effectively ended there when that happened for Red Bull. But again, if you're a driver, you want to fight for that top spot. And even if that's against your teammate, you want to fight for that top spot. If you're a fan, you want to see, entertaining racing. You want to see cars, going at each other, trying to overtake each other, battling for those positions. And I think that's what it's all about. If you're a team, you don't want to see, both your two cars crashing out. Of course not. But again, how often does that happen? Formula 1's about entertaining the fans, and drivers enjoy racing, and that was racing.
But you've got to admit that sometimes when it comes to teams such as Force India, there's so much money that is wasted ultimately by crashing into one another. And for a team like Force India, many argue that if Perez and Ocon had have been a bit more careful and less aggressive with their battles, they wouldn't have had to sort of go into administration and had to divulge with many...
They would have gone into administration just because the huge debt that the two... Because remember, there's three mass owners of Force India. There were, and the debt they were in was crazy. They would have gone into debt.
Sure, but a catalyst nonetheless, for sure. Yeah.
I'd like to
go for it.
Yeah. So the problem, I think, for the team orders is such a tricky one, because as much as I love drivers, they are only the tiny little part of what goes on in Formula 1. You've got an army of men behind it and women behind it developing. And even the truck drivers that move the cars from A to B give up their time for this. Even the children who work on the advertisement to get, just a little bit more money for Red Bull or whoever are involved. It involves everyone from all ages, all genders and everything. And you waste it by slamming your car into another. Is such a detriment. It's insulting to the team. And that's one side of it. Also, a safety point of view as well. Some of the stuff that Ocon and Perez do to each other is bordering on date. Look at Spa. They almost rammed. I can't remember which one it was. One was rammed the other into a wall.
Perez and Ocon.
Yeah, it was not a. It was one of those walls that sort of protrudes out, and then he slammed him into the protruding wall. That's a good way to kill your teammate.
Yeah.
it's so dangerous stuff they do. And things like, without the halo device, like Verstappen's car could have ridden up onto Ricciardo's car and crushed him. That's why you have team orders often, is to say, guys, you're getting a little bit too close now, slow it down a bit. What I don't like, and this is where I completely agree with you, Jake, is when you've got a brilliant race and Mercedes comes on and goes, by the way, we want Hamilton to win, so do you mind not racing with him, because, we need him to win. And Bottas has actually said, I'm sick and tired of being the secondary driver. I'm sick and tired of slowing everyone down. Have you seen that in the news?
Yeah, but he knew when he was
knew
going
what he
to
was signing up
Of course,
for.
so why is he complaining then? Because he knew what he was signing up for.
Right, so how would you like it? How would you like it as a fan? You've just said you hate it when they cross over. Now try being a driver.
I'm just saying. Like, of course, I hate it as a fan when cars are told to hold position, etc. But in the case of Bottas, for him to complain. I don't think that's warranted, because he knew when he went to Mercedes.
Yeah.
Completely knew.
I'd say I think he lied to himself. Like to say now, I'm sick and tired of it. I think he certainly maybe underestimated how much he would be the slowing down driver. But I do get where he's coming from a little bit. They can be really extreme in their no more fighting, you lot, and that's because I think Mercedes are a bit paranoid, especially after what happened before with Hamilton and Rosberg. With the in-house fighting there, they hated each other by the end of it and crashed into each other. And all teams are going to get that moment where two cars crash into each other. It's inevitable. Sometimes it's unavoidable, just because of, I don't know, a spin or one car hitting another and hitting another like a billiard balls. And sometimes it's completely irresponsible driving, as we can see from Verstappen and Ricciardo. And that's what happens when you have two really powerful drivers, a dominant driver. And that's perhaps why we haven't seen it necessarily from Mercedes, is because Hamilton is such a dominant driver. But I think team orders are a problem sometimes, and sometimes they're not. And that's why they will never change. And that's why, as a fan, you've got to get over it, because no team is going to give up a potential constructors title because of it, because of the amount of people involved in it. And if I actually had to make a judgment, I would say that's the right call. You can't let down 400 people for the sake of one guy getting a trophy at the end, because a constructors title, in my opinion, is worth so much more than one bloke, because we love it. We love the teams.
Very balanced way to end that, Tristan. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for listening to our very first F1 in review here at Surge. I warmly thank Jake Willis and Tristan Fancourt for offering up their opinions and expertise on these 4 races. We look forward to the next podcast, F1 in review on Surge, where we'll be looking at the next 4 races in chronological order of Spain, Monaco, Canada and France. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Next time.